Hi, and welcome to Partners in Progress, a couples podcast about love, life, and well-being in your 20s with me, Elouise.
And me, Sammy.
In this podcast, we'll be discussing topics like relationships, health, well-being, spirituality, and just life. From tips and tricks to failures and falls, all while sharing our story as we try to figure out building and growing a life together in the chaos of modern-day society. We'll be coming to you every Sunday with our shares and invite some guests to share their experiences too. So grab a blanket, a cuppa, and settle in to Partners in Progress.
Hello, and welcome back to Partners in Progress, episode 5, I believe it is now.
Yeah.
I feel like we've done so many already. But this time, we're going to be talking a bit about Imbolc. Imbolc? I always feel like I'm pronouncing it wrong.
I am as well. That's just how we say it.
Okay, that's fine. Yeah, if anyone knows it better than us, feel free to let us know, and we'll try and pronounce it right. Which is the sort of festival, I don't know if festival is the right word, celebration on the beginning of February to kind of start the new year. And as well as that, we're going to be talking about the Wheel of the Year, which that's kind of a part of, and then seasonal living, which sort of ties it all together, really. I'm not necessarily the expert on this, so I think you're going to be talking a bit more about some of the specifics, but I'm going to be chiming in with all sorts of questions and my opinions on it throughout as well.
Yeah. I mean, as a full disclaimer, I would not consider myself an expert regarding like the academics or high knowledge about it, but we both kind of try to live seasonally, and the Wheel of the Year is a kind of key part of that. And I know a bit, and I think it's more just about sharing our perspectives and experiences with a little bit of kind of knowledge we've come across during that process as well.
Yeah, I think my knowledge is in a different area than yours, as in there's less of it, but I feel like I've learned a lot from you, and especially around living seasonally and things like that I can share from a person's perspective who doesn't necessarily have as much experience with that, but maybe wants to start living seasonally and implement some of that into their lives.
Yeah, it's definitely like a really interesting kind of approach and way of living. To some degree, we all kind of live seasonally in terms of, I feel like certain times of year you're more interested in certain activities, certain meals, things like that. And it's something that's kind of biologically coded within us, but it's something that we've kind of separated from since the modernization of current society, really. So the Wheel of the Year is a really nice way of coming back to that, honouring our ancestors, and also honouring nature and ourselves, and just reconnecting a bit, really.
Yeah, I'm excited to kind of get into it.
Yeah, so happy Imbolc as well. That's what
Imbolc.
we've got to say. Imbolc blessings. So Imbolc is on the 1st of February. So this episode will be coming out around that.
I think it's the 2nd is when it will be coming out. So happy Imbolc for yesterday.
Yes. Well, technically, Imbolc is actually, it begins at sunset on the 1st and ends at sunset on the 2nd. So when this is actually, it comes on at 10 a.m. So it will actually be on the day.
Slap bang in the middle, really.
Yeah, exactly. So it's a nice way of at least kind of keeping it in our mind, even if we're not someone who celebrates it in a kind of ritualistic or a big way. It's just a nice thing to maybe just learn a little bit about today, and of course hopefully inspire you to look into it more yourself, talk to me about it as well, because I always love talking about this, and just expand your interests and approaches to living life, basically. So I think it would be probably helpful. So you're going to ask me questions, aren't you?
I am.
I'm
I'm question master.
You are. We've reversed it. You're normally the storyteller. So I will start off just talking a bit about what Imbolc and the Wheel of the Year is, and we can just kind of go from there and see what kind of things we want to talk about, and go from there. So you may have come across Wheel of the Year. It kind of is very associated in modern times with kind of paganism, or the witchy people. So it's kind of something that's familiar, and I think what's probably more familiar is the spring equinox and winter solstice, and I'd probably argue the equinoxes and solstices you kind of only know as like the shortest day of the year, longest day of the year.
That's all I knew it as before I met you, and I think it's like you're kind of aware that there is one around like spring and autumn is like the start of the seasons, but you don't really think of them beyond that in the normal
No.
way of looking at things, I think.
So I think maybe what's probably most known is actually the solstices, isn't it? Because you've got
Mm,
the shortest day of the year, which is around the 21st December, and the longest day of the year, which is the summer solstice, which is in the middle of June.
yeah.
So I think, and people I don't think even necessarily always know the names, they just know it as the shortest day or the longest day.
I think I did for a long time. I've only started calling it the solstices since being with you, I feel like.
Yeah, and as I've spoken about it to other people, I feel like they've asked that as well. I've been like, oh, it's the spring equinox in a week's time or something, and people are like, what's that? So it's kind of like there's a bit of disparity, I suppose, in kind of common knowledge. But oh yeah,
Is it equinox and then solstice? So equinox is for spring and autumn, is it? Or is it
yeah,
solstices?
yeah. So you've got these are like the four main points of the wheel of the year, which are the spring equinox, summer solstice, autumn equinox, and winter solstice. In that order, I believe. I feel like
That makes sense.
yeah,
I mean,
I've
you're
said all
starting
four,
with
haven't
yeah, that's
I?
4. Yeah, no, haven't added an extra one. But no, I hadn't realized they'd been named like that. I think in my head, I just kind of called them all solstice. So
Yeah,
it's interesting to think that.
that's because the equinoxes, and equinox is kind of like equal day and night because the
Mm,
equinoxes are actually a day of balance. So there's an equal amount of light as there is dark, which is why it's really weird that the winter solstice is on like the 21st of December, because obviously you associate that with like deep in winter, but it's actually kind of the beginning of winter.
yeah, that's true. I always forget that. That I always think by the time Christmas comes around or that holiday period, you're like, it's near the end of winter now. And it's like, no, it's literally just begun 4 days ago,
Yeah, I know.
or however many.
But it's kind of that's the thing I think what the Wheel of the Year really helps with is the fact that it gives you a bit of more intentional awareness of the seasons passing rather than kind of, I feel like there's, especially here in the UK, I think we have quite strict perspectives of the season. So I think everyone kind of thinks autumn begins on like the 1st of October
Yeah.
and ends on the 31st of
Yeah.
October. Like autumn is only a month.
Yeah.
And then you think of winter, and I feel like everyone kind of thinks after December it's done.
Yeah, they're like it doesn't feel like it's spring yet, but it feels like it's not winter either. It's like this weird no man's land period
Yeah.
of a season.
And that's why the kind of wheel of the year helps, because it isn't a overnight change of season, but there's actually this gradual process and kind of gradual ascension and descensions into seasons.
Mm.
So, and that kind of leads us on to like Imbolc, which is the one that's coming up here. So the equinoxes and solstices are like the four sun festivals, and then there's four others in between each of the equinoxes and solstices, which are the midpoints of the seasons, and they are the four fire festivals. So I always get confused in this because sun and fire to me are like the same
I was
thing.
going to say, I thought you were going to say the others were like moon festivals for a
I
second there,
know,
and then
but
it's
they're
like, no,
not.
they're fire.
So I always call them all the fire festivals, but they're actually not there. I mean, there's also like the four ones are called like the major sabbats, I think, but there's so many different,
Mm.
because it's so ancient old, there are so many different perspectives and cultural ways of celebrating in different countries, and different words are used all over the globe because there are certain celebrations. And like I know you in Sweden call the summer solstice like midsummer, is it?
Midsummer, yeah. Don't ask me what the winter one is. I'm going to disappoint everyone who's Swedish now.
Study
Midsummer, I
up.
know as it's. I can jump a little bit on this one, but it's like the biggest sort of, to Sweden at least, is a very big festival again on that summer solstice, but it's got all its own rituals there. And then I know so many different cultures have like versions of that, or
So
especially around
many.
it, like in kind of Denmark and Norway, they have their own sort of takes on it. So I can imagine for all of these ones, they're all going to be slightly different, but have common threads, I'm guessing.
Mm.
But yeah, it's interesting that that's like the big one for Sweden at least.
I've been down a massive rabbit hole when I kind of started learning about the Wheel of the Year and all of the different. There are countless different countries that have so many different traditions, and it's so fascinating. Like you could research it for for years, because there are so many different ways of celebrating all these different kind of things along the year. But I think what's important is the main thread that pulls everything together is the fact that the Wheel of the Year, although I think a lot of people now would associate it with paganism, it's really at the kind of just core foundation of it. All it is a simple way of connecting to nature and its seasons throughout the year. And it's what our, before kind of modern technology and modern like agriculture, what's the word? Practices, agricultural practices. The Wheel of the Year was literally about survival, because there was no clocks or the calendars were very different. And instead of the classic calendar that we have now, which I think is the Georgian calendar,
I want to say Georgian. Yeah.
but our ancestors, they didn't use that. They needed to know when to plant things. They needed to know when to gather stock for hibernation, and the winter months where literally if you did not know what was going on in nature, you would not survive. And that's at the core of the Wheel of the Year, is simply a massive kind of link between us and nature, and our way of living is fully based on the seasons. And what we don't realize is, although we've kind of become detached by it, like we're expected to work 9 to 5, Monday to Friday, every week, every month, every season, the exact same way, really, our bodies still remember the seasonal way of living, the kind of, and it's why it's there are so many different reasons, but it's why I feel like there's such an increase in things like seasonal affective disorder in winter, in the kind of the January blues, the winter blues, because our society is built one way to expect us to live the same way
All
as
the
in
time.
like summer.
Yeah.
And I know another thing that people don't realize is seasonal affective disorder can also happen in summer, but it's just a different version.
How does that differ then? Because I always thought it was like a winter thing from everything I'd seen. It's more just due to the lack of sunlight and everything like that affecting it. So
Yeah, well, if you think about what your life is like in summer, what do you think is challenging about summer?
hay fever. No, for
Yes.
me specifically, I guess it's probably the fact that for some people it can be that it's light for so long. So it's almost the opposite, quote unquote, problem from like winter, where it's like it's dark for the majority of the time. It's going to be light for the majority of the time.
Yeah, exactly. So what it is, from again, I'm not an expert, I'm not a diagnostic um, professional, but from what I've kind of gathered, a seasonal affective disorder in summer is about the fact that there's this high expectation to be full energy and do much, and things like burnout are very common in summer, because you want to be out all the time. Your sleep's affected because of the increase of sunlight and the natural, just general sense of awakeness and activity that goes on in summer, and also the comparativeness. And I think that's extra kind of turned up a notch when you're scrolling through your feed and seeing people on these beautiful holidays, or they're like doing loads of different things in summer. That can have the same kind of effect in like, I'm not making the most of my summer. I'm fed up of summer. I want it to end. And also the heat, in terms of just the temperatures, the effect that the increased temperatures can have on the body. You'll be sweating more, the fatigue will be higher, things like sunburn and stuff like that. Those are all kind of negative impacts that can happen from the season of summer. So it can lead to a lot of like burnout as well, and that's the same thing that you kind of see in winter. And obviously everyone feels like there's a lot of cold and flu that goes around in winter, but that's because of being inside more.
Yes, that shared spaces makes it easier for the germs to get around and things.
Yeah, but you can get ill quite quickly in summer as well, from the just natural bodily effects, and also the increased busyness of just being around more people all the time.
And the increased pollen. No,
Yeah,
I'll shut up about hay
true.
fever now. But no, it's interesting kind of looking at that. And I feel like that kind of mirrors what you're saying about the Wheel of the Year as a whole, is it says like these mirror effects throughout it, with obviously having the solstice in the summer and winter, and your body's going to react differently to both of those. And it's just kind of got to adapt to either one in different ways, which I feel like
Yeah.
is, and again, it comes around to that. But I also found it interesting, kind of looping around a bit, but it's the fact that it's split up in a different way than the calendar we use now. It's split up
Mhm.
into like 8 sections as opposed to 12. But I like how they're
Yeah.
both anchored around the seasons in a way, because you obviously have 3 months per season roughly,
Mhm.
and then you've got like 2 sections of the wheel of the year per season as well. So I like that it
Yeah.
always comes back around to seasons.
Yeah, well, the equinoxes and solstices are the markings of the beginning of a season, and the four fire festivals, which are things like Imbolc. I always forget what the other three are. It's Imbolc, Samhain. Um, there's so many. The others are confusing because there's so many different names for it. So I feel like I'm still learning what the names I want to use are.
Right.
Um, but yeah. So you've got let me think now. Okay, so you've got like the 1st February being Imbolc, then you've got Beltane, which is in between spring and summer. You've got the first harvest, which is in between summer and autumn, and then the one that probably again everyone knows is Halloween or Samhain,
Oh.
which is in between autumn and winter.
That's a
And
really interesting point that Halloween is one of them. Is I like how
yeah,
that's the only one that
people
has kind of
celebrate.
stuck around and has its own traditions that are more well established in the
Yeah.
mainstream, I guess.
Well, when the kind of things like May Day celebrations and how we celebrate Christmas and how we celebrate Halloween are rooted in um, the Wheel of the Year origins, and especially like kind of pagan traditions as well. A
Mm.
lot of them are what has formed our now way of celebrating different things like Easter holidays and things like that, and the kind of Halloween and Christmas and all those things. Um, so yeah, it is funny how like these things, and what's interesting about Samhain as well is the other three fire festivals are on the first of months, whereas All Hallows Eve, Halloween, Samhain, whatever you want to call it, is obviously at the end of a month. So it's the only one that's different as well.
Is there a reason for that? Does it fall down to like dates then? Do you reckon, if that's the case? Because obviously Halloween's like a longer month,
Yeah,
like, or but then
possibly.
saying that, like, so is January. So I'm intrigued on that one. But
Yeah, I'm not sure on that one fully, to be honest. I think that I mean they're very very close because obviously Halloween's on. I always forget if it's the 30th or
31st.
31st. Yeah, I
Yeah.
always get confused on it. But and the rest of them are on like the first or second. I mean
Mm.
they are like technically if you look at the dates they'll always say like the first of the month. But like I said with the Imbolc it's sunset to sunset. It technically goes across to the second.
Yeah. So it's across 2 days
So there's a
really.
matter of a day. And I think Samhain obviously has a lot to do with like the veil being thinner and last harvest. And it's very much kind of end of a cycle. So that's
Yeah.
why perhaps it might be that's at the end of a month rather than the beginning of a month. But they're roughly around the same time. And in the same way, the equinoxes and solstices are different days each year as well. So they vary from the 19th to the 22nd. Um, and I want to say it's to do with the moon cycles, like where the moon, the full moon, last full moon, new moons are, which affects which day of the month it falls on.
Comes back to the moons in the end.
Yeah, well, that's the thing. Like because it's obviously like rooted in nature, it's also kind of very tied in with the moon cycles,
Yeah.
because that's also nature and that also has its own kind of impacts on our life and our moods and our energies. So they are all kind of intertwined together because again, it's just coming back to nature.
Yeah. No, it's interesting that everything is kind of tied together, because you've got the seasons and you've got the moon cycles, and then you've got all of these other sections of the wheel of the year as well.
Hmm.
But it's interesting kind of understanding how they all tie together. Because I mean, I'm learning stuff now as we're recording as well. Because I know some of it because we've kind of implemented parts of it in our lives over the past few years and things, but everything is tied together.
What I really like about um, the dates, though, especially for like the equinox solstice, like I said, they can be between the 19th and 22nd. It gives you a bit of freedom for like celebrating, and the same thing for like full moons. Although you've got a certain time when it's at its peak, you can arguably celebrate these different things around those dates, like the energy of a certain event, a certain turning of the wheel. The energy is still around for more than a day, like so it gives you a bit of freedom that it falls on a day where you just don't have the time or life happens. And this
Mm.
is kind of what I'm going to be going on to as well, is how like we do it, how we can how we live seasonably now. Um, it's the fact that, there's that freedom to still tap into that energy and have those celebrations with a bit more flexibility.
Yeah, and I think that's what we've again, like with you say about life being busy and things, it does give you a bit of freedom and also kind of encourages you to still do it even if you miss the dead on day that it happens or whatever. It's not like, oh well, I've missed it now, I'm not going to do anything. It does encourage you to actually be like, no, I've still got time to
Mm,
enjoy it and celebrate it in the way that you want to.
yeah, definitely.
Did you want to move on to explaining a bit more about Imbolc specifically? Because I feel like
Yeah,
we've got a good amount of context around the wheel of the year and everything now.
that is very true. So, as I was talking about before, Imbolc is the 1st of February, so it'll be in the vibe of the energy of when this episode comes out. It has some other names, and like some of them might be more familiar to other people than everyone has their own different kind of wording for it. But it can also be known as St Brigid's Day or Candlemas.
Mm.
And why it feels very fitting that we're talking about the Wheel of the Year now is because most people will argue that Imbolc is the beginning of the Wheel of the Year in terms of it's the earliest date in the traditional, well, not traditional, but like the calendar that we now use in terms of like January 1st being the beginning of a year. It's the one closest to it. So some people would argue that this is the beginning of the year. For me, I feel like I use the spring equinox as the beginning of my year, but it's just how people
I guess all of them are
relate
valid in
to.
their own way. It just depends on what feels right for you
Yeah,
as well.
exactly. Because so Imbolc is the midpoint between the winter solstice and the spring equinox. So big in the middle of winter and spring. So technically the kind of
Midpoint.
yeah, it's the exact midpoint of so we're kind of at midwinter now.
Mm.
Which I feel like people will hear that and be like, oh,
I was gonna say, I'm
heart
like,
sinks.
spring's almost here, I guess. Almost.
Yeah. And it's very interesting because obviously we are now, because we are past the winter solstice, the days are stretching out and being longer. And so that kind of feels funny to say while you're saying like, oh, we're also only midwinter though.
Mm.
So it's a lot to get your head around when you're kind of learning to live seasonally in terms of all the different aspects of it. But what you will be pleased to know what Imbolc is actually like how the kind of meaning of the word Imbolc is in the belly of the mother.
Oh,
And that it basically is talking about the seeds underground in the earth right now, kind of stirring and preparing. You'll start to see kind of more birds returning. The kind of what are they called? The
snowdrops.
snowdrops.
Yeah,
Yes.
they're the first ones that kind of come out, aren't they?
Yeah, so they normally come out in February, but we've seen them coming out earlier this year. But it's kind of like a acknowledgement that spring is on its way. So we aren't there yet, but we are moving gradually and slowly towards it.
The stirrings are beginning. It's getting there now.
Yeah, how I like to describe the kind of energy of Imbolc is that we, instead of being like in hibernation, or being like wide awake like we would be in spring. So hibernation obviously very wintry, and spring is obviously like you kind of awake and start again. It's more like kind of a stretching, and it's how I would describe it as an experience you might relate to is a kind of meditative or like a dream-like state, where you're not quite conscious
Yeah,
or
it's like
unconscious.
when you've just woken up and you're not quite there
You're not
necessarily. It's
quite
like,
woken up yet.
yeah, well, yeah, it's that like middle point of like you could go back to sleep or you could wake up, but your brain's just not fully there. It's a bit fuzzy still. It's a bit,
Yeah.
yeah. I think that's a good way of describing it to kind of explain how nature's feeling at that point.
Yeah, exactly. So it's associated very much with like hope and preparation and things like that. So it really calls you to kind of start moving out of that hibernation state and instead to kind of start to still look inwards and deepen that looking inwards to explore who you want to become spring, because as much as we like our New Year's resolutions in January, they aren't necessarily compatible with how our bodies are reacting to the season. And so if you have dropped your New Year's resolutions, do not worry, because spring is on its way. And when spring happens, that's when you can really start building on that. But what Imbolc is all about is kind of looking at that and being like, well, spring is coming. Who do I want to awaken as? What kind of goals, what kind of person do I want to be come spring, because in spring and summer it's all about building and growing and learning and becoming. So it's a really kind of time of developing yourself and being a new kind of having a beginning, having an opportunity to put your best foot forward. And so now is about considering what that looks like for you.
Yeah, I think that makes sense, and I like your point about the New Year's resolutions because I feel like from what we're talking about, and again with living seasonally and all of that, it feels like it almost would make more sense to set them for spring rather than for like the
Absolutely.
beginning of the traditional New Year on the 31st of December, because your body's going to be like, well, it's not really the time to start all of this exciting new stuff now when I'm still waking up.
Yeah, and that's why like our practice when we in terms of our lives now, and why I encourage us to look at the kind of goal setting
Mm.
and action when it comes spring. So I always kind of do like journal sessions and things like that around each of the points of the wheel of the year, and that's something that we do, and it's why the questions around the spring equinox are all about like um kind of that process of like, right, this is what I'm going to action, this is what I need to make happen.
Yeah, and then December's more for like planning those rather than actually actioning them in some ways because you get those ideas down to begin with.
December is more about like,
Or New Year, I should say.
yeah, well,
Or
in
should not
bulk.
say. Imbolc, we'll
In
say.
bulk is about that. I think you kind of, when you're at the autumn equinox, you're kind of starting to enter a more reflective season. And then around the winter solstice, you're thinking more about stillness and being comfortable with quiet and contemplation. So, not really making any decisions as such, but kind of just thinking about the year past and thinking about the year ahead. It's all about, it's that, it's that hibernation, it's that
Mm.
musings. Whereas now with the Imbolc, it's about, okay, we've done that reflection, we've done that thinking of where we kind of want to go. So, let's think about what we need to take from our past and
To,
use that to influence our forward
yeah, I
motion.
guess it's what you're going to do to kind of get to those things you've been reflecting on and those goals that you want to start thinking about.
Yeah, and on New Year's resolutions as well. It's so funny because um, I've noticed it. Obviously, it's the really classic thing. So one of the sessions that I do on my playwork side is doing a supervised gym session for teenagers. And it's so funny because that means we're in the gym. And at the beginning of January, there was an increase of people at the gym.
Mm.
Like it was quite busy
Just
for like
all the
2
time.
weeks, and then last week, which would have been like around the 20s, um, of like January, um, it was like 1 or 2 people, and it was the people that I've seen for like the whole time I've done this
Yeah,
session.
so it's the people who already have it as part of their routine rather than all the
Yeah.
people who tried to start it up and then
And it was so funny seeing the classic just decrease of New Year's resolutions. Everyone's just gone, ooh.
was it like, could you see it like week on week almost? Was it like the first one was super busy, the second one less so, and the third one it's like regulars only?
Yeah, kind of. It definitely feels like in the like the last one I did was literally like 1 or 2 people in the gym, and then the week before maybe had like 3 or 4. So it has been kind of a gradual thing. But yeah, it's so funny kind of seeing that. But that's why it's so good, because you have another new beginning in the spring
I
equinox.
was going to say, if everyone's listening to this, it will be picking up back again around the spring equinox now instead.
Yeah, don't worry. But maybe use the time now to think about how you can put your best foot forward in terms of what you can do in preparation, so that when that spring energy hits, you can utilize it as best as possible. So
Mm.
things like, have you got the right kit? Have you got the right, if it's like a gym, if you want to start going to the gym, is thinking about all the steps you need. Like, you have a decent water bottle. Is your diet reflecting the exercise?
Mm.
Have you got the right kit? Have you got the right gym membership? In the same way, if you want to start like meditating or any other habit, you want to start gardening, again, it's thinking now is a really good time to use this in bulk energy to think about the how and the kind of steps of preparation, so that when the spring equinox arrives, you feel ready to begin.
Yeah, I think that's kind of what we will probably be trying to do around this as well. I was going to ask like how it tends to be celebrated normally from what you know, and I guess we could talk a bit about what we might do to celebrate it as well.
Yeah, so do you talking kind of a bit like about the like modernization in terms of
I
like
guess,
the
yeah,
roots.
like what the roots are in terms of how it's celebrated and maybe how that can be modernized. Because I know we've kind of touched on that a bit now, but just
Yeah.
to,
I mean, there are so, like I said, there are so many. I'd be here all day if I was talking about all the different traditions across different cultures and things like that. But the most kind of common that I've come across is about, obviously, as I said, Imbolc is also known as St Brigid's Day.
mhm,
And St Brigid is the goddess of sacred fire, and they kind of bring fertility, wisdom, and healing. So it's all about, at this point, in terms of like the farm animals, like sheep will be pregnant, I think, at this point, or like, they'll be beginning the process of having babies because babies arrive around spring equinox, don't
yeah,
they?
that's when you
They've
see
got
all the
to,
lambs come out.
yeah, they've got to be growing, so that's what they're kind of doing, and literally Imbolc in the belly of the mother.
Yeah,
That's that what that means is there's so much going on under the surface. It's just not quite ready to break through yet. And so this is St. Brigid is obviously very linked to that in terms of that fertility and sacred fire and things like that. So one of the things that would be done is kind of you'd make these straw dolls, um, and they'd be taken around each house to kind of bless each home, with St. Bridget's. So the doll would represent St. Brigid, and you'd
right.
be using that doll to bring those energies, the fertility, wisdom, and healing to each house. Yeah, you look like you're about to say something.
No, I was thinking that's a really cool. Do you know like where those dolls would come from? If it was like the church would do this, or just more people in the general
Well, I suppose
population?
sometimes like kind of if you're looking like ancestrally, they're almost like one and the same in terms of because of the community approach to life at that point where it was a village life, it was all about one
Yeah.
another helping each other, and it was kind of a case of like if one person religious, then like most people or all people there would be religious because it would be just a simple part of life, and you could argue even like implementing the wheel of the year is religious in a sense in terms of the spiritual side because nature itself is a very spiritual essence.
Mm.
So it's kind of, yeah, it is kind of one and the same. So I imagine there might have been someone of that was kind of representative of like whether it's like a pastor or like a kind of someone who is like higher up in terms of looking after the community. I imagine there was probably a specifically chosen person who would be the one going to each home. And then I imagine at some point people just start making their own and keeping them in their own houses and things like that. So, and a lot of these kind of straw dolls things are quite common across quite a lot of the fire festivals, actually. I think there's quite a similar um, practice on Beltane. I might be wrong with that, but I know that I've seen straw dolls come up a lot with
Yeah.
different things.
I was gonna say I half thought when you said about straw dolls that it was gonna be burning them at some point, because I know that's obviously around Guy Fawkes and things like that. There's the
Yeah.
burning of like effigies and things like that. So I don't know if that was gonna be part of it. But I guess
I'm
for spring it makes sense to not be. It's kind of the start of something new rather than
I want to say that there is a burning or like a drowning of dolls on Lammas, which is like um before the autumn equinox. It's like the last, like, well, it's like the, I don't know if it's around like it's kind of like the harvest festival type thing at
right.
that point. Um so again, there's a lot of practices that if you look back as to do with burning or drowning or
All that
there's
fun stuff.
there's so many different kind of things to do with that. But it's because although it looks like it's a really harsh thing, what it really is it's connecting to an element of nature and it's connecting to an intention. So when people are burning things, it's normally because they're releasing or letting go of,
Yeah.
um and they are like, whereas like the drowning is more about purifying and cleansing, and obviously that's something, those two things are very common across many different religious and spiritual practices and just general life practices
Mm.
really. So it's not unheard of that there's kind of like straw dolls that come up a lot in these kind of circumstances.
But for
But
this one, it's just bringing them round and blessing them. So they get to,
yeah, well, yeah, there might be other traditions as well, but
yeah.
the important thing about it is yes, it's a doll like made out of straw, but it's what it represents because at that point people didn't really have the things that we have now to represent certain goddesses or gods or
Mm.
God if you believe in God. There was less of the like more physical decorative things. You just had to use what you grew, what you had to use what was around you to bring this energy and intention around it. So it's something that we can all do in terms of, if you look down the like witchy route, it's all about spells and bringing together different herbs and plants and flowers, crystals, to bring intentional energies. And you can have various. I know that you don't necessarily kind of have the same, like, you don't think, oh, because I have this crystal it means that this is going to be the
Yeah,
energy, but you appreciate the fact that a crystal can symbolize an energy, and just by having the intention of knowing this crystal that I have right now is this intention, it keeps it in your mind, so your brain is thinking of that, so it's more likely to seek that out.
yeah, reflect it in your actions.
Exactly.
So
So even if you're not spiritual, you can still appreciate the importance of intention and um kind of
I
what's
guess
the
how it
word?
brings it to your mindset and your
Yeah,
approach to
mindset.
things.
That's the word. I was looking for. I was like, mind something.
I thought of that and I was like, that's a good one. But I'm glad it tied into what you were thinking. It means I'm
Yes,
on the right path.
mindset. Exactly. So it can literally just be a mindset thing. Like, you don't have to be proper woo woo and have
That's
like
the
the
technical
full.
term. Yeah.
No, don't. That's not
No, it's
technical. I would say witchy because that's what I am. Um, but yeah, so that's the kind of like traditional um kind of
approach.
perspectives,
Yeah.
yeah, in terms of St Brigid, and also obviously in terms of just the practical sense, um, it was a sign of hope, Imbolc, and it's a sign that winter is coming to an end and spring is coming on its way.
Mm.
And there were traditional actions, like I said, there's the straw doll, but as I was talking about with water, there is also like a purification and cleansing process by kind of connecting to a spring or holy well.
Mm.
And going back to your question about how this relates to, like, how can you kind of modernize this and bring it
Yeah.
in? Um, you can take these kind of things, so you can still make a straw doll if you want,
That'd
that's
be nice.
fine. Or you can write the words on your mirror, or in terms of the kind of purification and cleansing process and connecting to spring, you could go to, a river or into the sea, a spring if you have one nearby, which would
Have one
be,
to hand. Yeah.
oh, amazing.
I know it'd be nice, but
Or you can just go in the shower, or connect to like a holy place that has like that water source, and use that as your kind of cleansing and purification process, and that's how we can kind of modernize it.
I like that. It's just I think a lot of this approach with modernizing a lot of these things seems to be just bringing it to a way that's accessible for the modern age, because obviously a lot of these traditions date back so long. It's to when
Mm.
life was quite different, and again, like you say, a lot of those like springs or rivers may be super easily accessible for people in villages, but less so now for people in cities and things, for example. So I like that idea of just looking for ways you can make it work for you that connect to the old ways, but make them easier for now.
Yeah, and that same principle can be applied to any aspect of the wheel of the year. So I obviously connect to the wheel of the year and seasonal living. But I also don't have the practical ability to go off work for most of winter.
That's
I
true.
like I
Sorry,
lock
I'm
myself
hibernating
away.
now. No, no more for me for the year.
Yeah, but what you can do is find those moments in between of stillness and slowness and be intentional about that. So maybe giving yourself more time to walk somewhere. Like, say you've got to do your shopping and it's the middle of winter, giving yourself more time and intentionally slowing down your steps. Like, I know it's cold and I know it could be miserable, but if you're putting on that waterproof trousers, layering yourself up and getting yourself out, or just naturally just taking slower steps, that is living seasonally. That is connecting to nature,
Mm.
connecting to your natural state of being, which is seasonal. Planning, at least trying to plan your calendar in terms of events and things like that to do with the energies of each of the seasons and these kind of parts of the year. It's just those moments in between that we can bring little bits of nature in. One of the things we like to do is, instead of just decorating for Christmas, we decorate all through the year, don't we?
Yeah, I was going to say that kind of ties into the seasonal living side of things, is just making our space feel more appropriate for whatever the season is. And I know that's something that we want to do with our garden when we get there
Mm.
as well, of just like growing crops seasonal. That makes it sound fancy than it is, but growing like any food and vegetables and herbs that are seasonal around then as well, just to really then be eating seasonally as well, because I think that's one thing, again, with supermarkets and things like that that have everything all year round. You kind of forget that some crops are seasonal,
Mhm.
at least in terms of they used to be. Obviously now it's different, but I think it's nice to be able to kind of bring that into your life in some way, and I feel like it's impacted mine quite positively, to be fair.
Mm.
But we can always talk more about seasonal living now, or potentially another time, because I feel like we've talked a lot about
Yeah.
the Imbolc and the year of the
Yeah, I
wheel of the
think
year, not year
yeah,
of the
I
wheel.
think it's yeah, we've obviously spoken just and it is just about being intentional and doing really small acts to connect you to the wheel. And this is one of the ways that I would argue the actual awareness of the wheel of the year is a way that you can live seasonally, because by taking, even if it's just half an hour on each of the symbolic kind of turns of the wheel of the year, the 8 different points,
Mm.
by celebrating them in some degree, you are allowing yourself to live seasonally, because you're aware and you're connected, because you're making an intentional choice to understand what nature is doing right now, and feel into those energies and keep those energies in mind for that part of the year ahead.
Yeah, I think that's sums it up really well, to be fair. And I think that's what we try and do, and kind of do successfully do, really, I think, is try and enjoy all those holidays as they come around. Not holidays, but enjoy the events as they come around and celebrate them our way. And that's something that hopefully you can do as well.
Yeah, definitely. And I think if this is something that's kind of been interesting to people listening, then we can definitely talk about um, living seasonally in another episode, and
Yeah,
talking about, so I think what we haven't touched on today is our own kind of experiences and practices that we do. It's so funny as we're talking about this, because the rain has picked up. Like the rain is just coming
massively.
down
Yeah, it's
massively. It's like a sign of like, all right,
time to chill out again
bring it
now.
to a close, guys.
Wrap
It's
it up.
time for cozy chillness. It's just a reminder of winter that we are still in. Um, but before we go, I will obviously do our little wellbeing
Yes.
segment, which I have not thought about this last week, so we'll see.
Think on your toes.
So, what has been something that has brought you joy or a boost in well-being this last week?
The thing my mind jumps right to is painting. We've been doing a lot of painting of both fences outside and our corridor inside in our house. And I think
Mm,
that's been quite nice in a mindful sense, as a lot of my work involves me kind of sitting down and using a lot more like mental energy,
yeah.
like thinking through problems and stuff like that. So having something that's more of a physical outlet after doing that really helps engage my body and my brain in a different way.
Mm,
And it's just a really nice opportunity to get to catch up on both of our days in a way that we might not have as much otherwise, because you can't be on your phone or on your devices or distracted in other ways when you're painting. You've only got
it's true.
the paint, so you not you have to talk to each other, but you get the opportunity to talk to each other. And I think
Yeah.
that's been really nice over the past week.
Oh, that's sweet.
What about you? Or have I
Um,
stolen yours again? I seem to do that a lot.
well, I think I've just had a few moments this week, and you could argue it might be to do with the fact that we've been doing house bits again.
Mm.
But just a kind of like I've had a couple of like really pleasant moments of that kind of remembering, oh, this house, is ours, and because we've been in rented and living with family our whole lives up until we moved into here, um, it's really special because it's something we were working at for like 4 years.
I think pretty much since we kind of met and were like knew we were in a serious relationship, it's been something we've been working towards, really.
Exactly. And so I just have felt really grateful that we are here, and just having that kind of renewed like opening up your eyes and being like, oh yeah, this is our home. This is something we do, because I think you can get into the mundane, can't you? And again, that is that hibernation we're gradually approaching, starting to kind of come back alive a little bit, and that might be why as well.
I think, yeah, it feels like this week has kind of been the beginning of that, because I know you've done a bit more painting while I've been working and stuff on the fences and things like that. But this is the first full week where I've been doing it sort of every other day, I'd say, on and off,
Yeah, we've
like
been very
pretty
productive.
regularly. So it's like it does feel like my body's kind of becoming awake again, and I think this is a really nice way to start doing it when you can't always go for longer walks or be outside for as long. It's like at least you can be outside to paint for a bit, or you're doing something physically inside that you might not do otherwise. So yeah.
And what is something you are going to do or you need my support with doing in this next week?
More painting. I say it kind of jokingly, but I do think it's been really helpful this week, and we're not quite done with everything that we want to do yet. So I think just kind of keeping it as regular as we can, because I think it's a bit of a busy week outside of like just our work, well, including our work and some other bits next week. So I think fitting it around that to the point that we're not overwhelming ourselves. So if it's not as much as this week, that's fine, but just at least once or maybe twice if we can summon the energy for it in between everything. What about you?
Well, obviously the coming week for us is when Imbolc is actually arriving. So obviously this is coming out on Imbolc, but hopefully when this episode's coming out, we are celebrating Imbolc.
Yeah, that's true.
So that's something that I'm really excited about. And also an extra little thing. So I've got 2 this week. But we have just brought home a soup maker. And you know you're old when you get excited about soup makers. But I'm very excited because it's a really easy way of us getting some good kind of nutrition in and healthier eating, and also just warming our souls up again as we carry on through the winter. And so just excited to have some nice soups this week as well, and just feel the soul warming up and feeling nourished and putting good stuff into our bodies, basically.
I'm excited about the bread that goes with the soup as well.
Yes, great bread.
I love the crusty bread.
We love crusty bread.
We always do. Anyway.
Our tagline for the episode.
Yeah, that's the main topic, really. Just crusty bread.
But as that is everything today, I of course want to wish you a happy Imbolc.
Yes.
And we will see you next time.
See you next time.